Hello everyone, and welcome to this session on the creation of an interior perspective view within Rhino and Photoshop. This session is going to be focusing on utilising the Rhino Renderer and Photoshop to create an interior perspective view using this model here, which is a kind of adaptation of the model we've been working with in previous sessions. As with the last session we did on creating an exterior view, the first part of this class will be focusing on how to set up a camera. Now this slightly differs when using an interior view because the space is a lot tighter and we have to be quite clever with how we set up our camera angles and the positioning of the camera to get the best out of the view. As you can see here, I've got this kind of internal space in this room and we're going to be using this space here to set up a view within. Once we set up the camera, we're then going to be looking at setting up lighting and also materials in Rhino Render and how to best utilise Rhino Render's features to get the most out of your view, to light it up in the best way and to kind of maximise that so we can then take it into Photoshop later. Now to begin with, we're just going to start just as we did with the external view in placing our camera and our target position. I'm just going to turn off the floors so we can more easily access the inside of the model here. And I'm just going to draw out, just in this perspective viewport, just a box to represent eye level height of a person. I always do this for any view setup just so I can be sure that I'm setting up my initial camera at eye level. Now, compared to external views, it might be in interior views you might have the camera a little bit lower. This could be if you're sat at a dining table or something like that, so it's good to set up the camera at eye level just using these two boxes, set at a person's height and then view, set camera and place camera and target. So place the camera in and the direction the camera is looking, like so. Now as you can see, when you set up that camera initially, it's obviously very cropped in this view because this space is quite tight. So we really need to kind of pull back the camera and increase the lens or decrease the lens length to get a kind of a wider frame of view on our image. Now when you set up a camera, if you go down into the properties panel here, you'll see that we've got the camera in the view settings and it's got a lens length. Now at the moment it's at 50, so we're going to knock that right down. Let's try 30 for now. And start to pull it back just so we can see more of our frame here. So what I usually do is I just kind of play around with the numbers, pulling it back until it's got what I'm kind of looking for. And I'm trying to get the majority of the space in shot here, but while retaining the eye level height I've kept. So let's take it to 20. So at that kind of lens length, we're kind of getting there. We've got a better view of our room. What I might also do is zoom out slightly, and instead of using the scroll wheel, which might take you out and beyond the kind of view you want, if you hold down the control and the right mouse button, you can kind of dynamically zoom back, and I'm actually going into the box I set up there, so we can delete that box now. And it gives you a little bit more control over that zoom. So I could pull it back and stay to here. I'd quite like to get that roof in as well, up there, so that's kind of working. And it looks like you can also check your Z location, which tells you your height from the floor. If your floor level is set at 0, 0, that will give you an accurate reading of your height in this panel here, so we can always use the pan just to pull it up a little bit. 1.6, 1.7 is quite good height for eye level. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that now. So as with our other views, once we're happy, we can save a named view of this. I'm just going to save this as interior number 3. Now, what's different about kind of doing interior views, which I might kind of a technique I might use in comparison to the exterior views, is once I've set up my named view there, I'm going to go back here, and we're actually going to be working in the 4 windows a lot more when setting up interior views. Now for this shot I'm actually going to use the interior 2 that I'd set up previously. It's a bit kind of more slightly angled view there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this view a bit wider, larger there, so I can see it over here. And I'm just going to move around these viewports, and the idea is I want a small one for the top view here, which I'm going to use a bit. The right hand view I don't really use too much when I'm doing these, and then I'm going to turn my left view just by right clicking on it, I'm going to set view and turn it into my perspective. So we've now got our interior view here and our perspective view here. We can turn back on the floors now. Now the reason I do this is I kind of want to be working in both these views simultaneously. I can use my interior view to sort of see how my design and changes I make to my model are affecting that particular view, and I'll be working in my perspective view, so any kind of model edits I'm doing, moving stuff around, I'll do within that view. I also might put on my interior view onto the rendered view as well to see how the lighting is affected, and I'm just going to flick that on for now. So that brings us nicely onto the lighting setup. So once you've set up your camera and you're happy with that, the next thing I'll do is set up the lighting in the scene. Now at the moment, if I go to render and my render properties, we're just using the Rhino Renderer for this example. So at the moment I just have my sun on. Now I've tried a few renders out with the skylight. The problem with the skylight I've found is that it gets really grainy in the image, and you can see there it's almost kind of whited out. It's almost too bright. But if we do a quick render preview of this, you'll see that the lighting's coming out quite nicely, but even when I do the final render, we've got this large amount of grain in the image, and I don't really want that. I kind of want it to be a lot cleaner and sharper, so I usually sort of refrain from using the skylight, which is in the render properties and just below the sun. I'll usually tick that off, and I'll just keep the sun setting on. Now the difference with that is if I just have the sun on and we do the same render preview, you'll notice that it's now a lot darker. We can barely see anything in our scene, and it's just got the kind of light and shadow. So what we want to do is we want to kind of add in a light into the internal view here to brighten up the scene so we can actually see what's going on inside, but still got those nice shadows from the sunlight coming through those windows there. So to do that, Rhino comes built in with a series of light tools, which if you go on the standard toolbar here, just along to light, if you hold down there, you'll see there's kind of different types of light here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to create a rectangular light, and in the top view I'm just going to draw this in next to my model there, and you can see already that it's kind of brightened up that space there, even though it's not even kind of in the room yet. But if I then go to perspective, you'll see when you create a rectangular light, all it is it's a rectangle that emits light from there, and the arrow is the direction the light is being emitted. So I'm going to take this out, I'm just going to rotate it using the gumball there, and we're going to move it into the room. Now I just want this to kind of give a backlight to everything that's going on in this space. So what I'm going to do is I usually with these I'll kind of take them and I'll move them up to the ceiling somewhere. And you sort of want them out of frame of the shot. Let's put this on ghosted so we can see this a bit more clearly. And try not to have them kind of cutting through anything, because it creates a weird shadow otherwise. So let's just rotate that a little bit more. And it's basically like a backlight to the view. So at the moment my camera's down in this corner here, and we're just putting this rectangle light just above, so it's lighting up what our camera sees there. Now I'm just going to move it back here, like so, and I think that should be good there. So let's try that out. Now before we hit render, if I select the light and go to properties here, you'll see we've got an intensity and in shadow intensity. Now at the moment it's at 100, which is the full extent of the intensity can be, so it might be quite bright in the scene. So let's go back into our interior view, and you can already see it looking quite washed out just in that kind of preview of it there. And let's do a test render of that. It's not looking too bad actually. So now you can see that we've kind of brightened up the room, but we've still got that nice kind of contrasting shadow there. You can see this corner here is quite dark because I think that's where the plane is cutting the geometry. So it might be that I want to move the plane back a little bit just so we get that bit of light as well. Let's just pull it back slightly. Let's try that. Okay, so that's working quite well now. So if you find it too bright, you can always play around with the intensity of that light as well, just by selecting the rectangular light and dropping this down. I usually drop both the intensity and the shadow intensity down in the same amount. Yeah. And you can see it gets a little bit darker if you don't want it as bright in the scene. But I basically use that to help me sort of light up the space a bit and give that ambient lighting to the rest of the room. So we've still got our strong shadows, but then we also have a kind of light that's vaguely kind of lighting up the rest of the space. Another feature of the rectangular light is you can also give it a colour. And sometimes with these views I quite like to sort of tint it slightly blue. If you've got a sun coming in, a lot of the time it might be a slightly blue light just from the sky, very, very kind of subtly, but I might just take it into a blue here and just put it sort of midway like that. Let's see how that comes out. And make sure you're in the right view, obviously, when you hit render. There you go. So you can even kind of increase that a bit more to take away some of this grey. But as we start to add materials as well, that will disappear too. So for now I'm quite happy with this lighting. So we're going to kind of proceed with this view and lighting. Now, also when I'm kind of setting up interior shots, you really want to make the sort of angle you're choosing and the way you're setting up the light work best for the view. And sometimes it might mean that you actually need to kind of increase window sizes, cut new windows in the view, really to sort of make that space work as well as it can do. So it's really useful to sort of use Rhino Renderer and any kind of rendering software you're using as a design tool in this manner. So it's not just that you kind of designed your building and then you click render for your final images at the end of the day. You're actually using this tool as a way to help you design and create the most effective spaces you can make. So for example, in this space, it might be that actually this kind of part of my floor here is quite dark and I might want to cut some windows in the left hand side to help kind of bring some light into the space. You see I've also set up the sun to create these dynamic shadows on this wall, which I like quite a lot. So it's good to sort of play around with the sun settings as we spoke about in the last session and really try and get them sort of working as best they can for the view you want. You don't want a kind of view like this and no sun coming through the windows, for example. So it's really good to sort of maximize the potential of your space. So for example, for this particular space, I've actually sort of previously cut out some holes in this wall here, which I'm just going to delete these parts of. And now I'm going to just go back to my interior view. Let's re-render that. Let's make sure we haven't slipped off the view there. So now we've got this kind of strong light coming in from the side there, and it's a bit more lit up on the edge. So it's really good to sort of set up your views, and that's why I quite like working with my view open as I'm modelling. That way I can see the effects any design changes have in real time in my kind of preview here. So it's good to sort of balance those out and work with them simultaneously and make sure that's sort of locked in there too. I'm now going to start to add in more detail into this view. This is going to be using the same techniques as we covered in the previous video, so I'm not going to show it in detail in this particular session. I'm just going to pause the video and start to add in handrails up to this edge, maybe a staircase, and some extra details into this particular space. What is key to note is that I'm just going to be adding detail where I can see it in this view, and this is why it's a good idea to set up cameras and name views early on in the design process, because it allows you to target particular areas that you can add detail in for particular views, and not sort of, it doesn't mean you have to model everything in your entire building. You're just kind of modelling selected parts for the things you can see, and it's a way to prioritize your time when sort of working on a view like this. So I'm just going to pause the video and start to model up some extra details, and then we're going to go through it and how that affects the render. So you can now see I've added a bit more detail into my model. I've added this balustrade at the top. On this top level here we've got a staircase in the side. I've kind of opened a couple of the doors to make that sort of an interesting outer deck area there, and all the while I was just sort of modelling stuff up and then checking in my view here to see how it affected the view I was setting up. Now, what we might also want to add is some furniture into this particular view, and to do that there's a great website you can download furniture that's already built in Rhino. This is the website here, GrabCAD, and it's a great place to download sort of simple furniture models, tables, sort of anything like that which you might want to add more detail into your scene. I always recommend sort of downloading models of chairs and things like that unless they're a bespoke part of your design. If you download them, then you can then tweak them and adjust them sort of later as well, and they're a quick way of kind of adding detail into your model, and then you can go back and edit them and tweak them if you need to. So let's try, we're going to kind of download this table and stools model here, and you can just download the file from there. And once that's downloaded, all you then have to do is got here, it comes with this Rhino file, and you can just click and drag and drop it into your scene, and then import the file when it asks you, and that would just drop the model in like so. What I usually do then is I might just take the model and group it just to keep it tidy, because it might come in lots of different parts. It's good to check the scale as well of models before you bring them in. And I'm then just gonna, in my top view up here, we can just move the model into place, and you can see here as I move it in we can check where it's coming in the file. And let's just rotate it around a bit, and I think I'll have it just so it's catching the light there in the foreground. Yeah, so that's quite nice. So we've got the light coming across the table there. So let's give this a test render to see how that's coming out. Make sure we're in the right view as well. That's now working quite nicely with the furniture in there, catching that light coming through the opening we made, and all those extra details in as well. I'm actually just going to render on the actual render button here so we can see it in a bit more detail. It takes a little bit longer than the preview, but because we haven't got that skylight in, it's actually a lot quicker than it would be. And there you can see the lighting's working quite nicely. We're getting good shadows on those objects in, and kind of the more detail you put into your models, the more effective your views are going to look. So it's really good just to spend time sort of modelling in details like handrail details, structure, columns, beams, kind of making sure doors aren't just fully closed or open, just having a bit of kind of variety in opening and closing doors, and it will start to kind of make your views look more dynamic. So that's the basics of setting up an interior view within Rhino. It might be that you then want to add in some more furniture maybe, or some more extra details in this model. For now we're going to kind of keep it here, and in the next lesson we're going to look at how to start texturing this model and adding basic textures into the scene. You could always just go with something like this which has no texture and then add your texture later in Photoshop. It's kind of up to you, but we're going to be looking at how to map textures correctly within Rhino and then start to enhance them back in Photoshop. And that will be covered in the next lesson. So look forward to seeing them. Thank you.